creepy Uncle Joe Biden is at it again. He has been accused of sexual assault. So we're going to look at this new accusation. But perhaps more importantly, we're going to look at the hypocrisy of Joe Biden, of the media, and of those who believed in the Me Too movement and the hashtag Believe Women. Because now they're singing a completely different tune. Before we look at this new accusation, it's first important to recognize that Joe Biden is not a stranger of things like this. For decades, it has been basically a running joke in DC that he has been very awkward, at least, around people. Whether it's smelling their hair or their necks or giving them awkward back rubs, it's not the first time that Joe Biden has been accused of sexual harassment or something like that. We see here from Vox that there have been multiple women who he has touched uninvited, and they felt very, very uncomfortable with that touch. However, this new accusation, like I said, is a bit more serious. I don't want to go into too much detail about it. If you want to, feel free to read this article, but the accuser's name is Reade. And she alleges that in 1993, some 27 years ago, while she was working in Biden's Senate office, he sexually assaulted her in a way that's pretty severe. Now, I do not know what really happened. Nobody does, except for maybe Biden and Reade. Actually, let's scratch that. Probably only Reade knows what happened because, let's be honest, Biden doesn't even know what's happening today, let alone what happened 27 years ago. When there are these accusations, it's generally he said, she said, and in spite of that, people tend to believe whoever they want to, without any of the real evidence. Brett Kavanaugh is a really good example of that, and we'll compare this a little bit more later on. As far as I'm aware, Joe Biden has remained completely silent about this accusation. He has, however, responded through his deputy campaign manager, who said women have a right to tell their story and reporters have an obligation to rigorously vet those claims. We encourage them to do so because these accusations are false. This comes from Kate Bedingfield, who is his deputy campaign manager. Now, she said that reporters need to vet these claims very seriously, which I agree with, but it kind of seems like she's saying they shouldn't be publishing this because it wasn't vetted properly. But she does outright say these claims are false, which is a pretty big jump from the hashtag Believe Women and hashtag MeToo to these claims are false. Now, perhaps I'm reading too much into this, but it seems interesting to me that Joe Biden would not speak about this himself, that instead he talked about it through Kate Bedingfield, who is presumably the highest ranking woman in his campaign. And she's coming out and basically saying he's not a sexual assaulter, he's not sexist, he's a good guy. Which to me is kind of like having a black friend come out and say that you're not racist, which I was under the impression is not a good thing, but I guess Joe Biden can do it here if it comes to sexism, I don't know. Now, even though Biden hasn't talked about his accusation specifically, he did talk quite a bit about the Kavanaugh accusation, which was just over a year ago, back in 2018. This is what he said in response to Christine Blasey Ford coming forward and making the accusation that Brett Kavanaugh had sexually assaulted her. He said, "For a woman to come forward in the glaring lights of focus, nationally, you've got to start off with the presumption that at least the essence of what she's talking about is real." And let me repeat that, because that makes no sense. The essence of what she's talking about is real. Whether or not she forgets facts, whether or not it's been made worse or better over time. So here we have Joe Biden just a year and a half ago saying that if a woman makes an accusation of presumably a public figure and she has to come out nationally to do so, that we should accept that the essence of what she's talking about is real because I guess she'd have no reason to lie about it. That's what we heard a lot during the Brett Kavanaugh hearing, that Blasey Ford had no reason whatsoever to lie about this. And yet now, Joe Biden is strangely silent when the accusation is brought to him, even though this woman, Reade, is still coming forward nationally, talking about a public figure who presumably has no reason to lie about it. And yet, Joe Biden is completely ignoring this. The hypocrisy of Joe Biden in this matter alone is astounding. I just want to emphasize just how ridiculously bad this is. If the accusation is made against someone who's not him, he's all for Me Too and Believe Women. But as soon as it's made against him, he is silent and he completely ignores things that he said just a year earlier. But Biden is not the only hypocrite here. The media is being very hypocritical as well. We have from The Guardian that most of the media is ignoring these allegations of sexual assault. They also comment how, in their view, right-wingers are being hypocritical because they're jumping on this, and left-wingers are being hypocritical because they're ignoring this. But I don't agree with that assessment. Those on the left were the ones who are saying the mere accusation against Brett Kavanaugh should be enough to disqualify him from the Supreme Court. And that same logic should apply here if you're on the left. the mere accusation against Joe Biden should disqualify him from running for president. But obviously it's not, because they're not even talking about it. The Guardian supposes that one possible reason for this is because Reade's accusations are very hard to prove, and that the incident happened a long time ago. But I would like to point out that the exact same thing is true of the Kavanaugh accusations. They happened even a longer time ago, but that did not stop the media and those on the left from jumping on it and pretending that Kavanaugh was a serial rapist. To emphasize even more the horrible media hypocrisy here, we have this article from Reason, where they highlight the fact that most mainstream media, including the New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, and many others, are essentially ignoring this and haven't said a word about Tara Reade or her accusation against Joe Biden. They say that ideally, before publishing anything like that, news articles would tread carefully and not rush to publish unverified rumors. However, they also point out that that's not what happened during the Kavanaugh hearing, that the mainstream press was actively covering Kavanaugh's accusations public reveal almost immediately. Again, there's this huge double standard here. Not only is the media completely ignoring this accusation, but they did the exact opposite during the Kavanaugh hearing. Because it was a Republican, they jumped on it with all the vigor they could muster, and it was front page news for what seemed like weeks at the time. Let me give you two brief examples. So one, if we go to CNN and we look up Tara Reade, who is the accuser right now, you find nothing. Absolutely nothing. Not an article, not a mention, nowhere. However, if you look up Blasey Ford, you find plenty of articles talking about her. The same is true for the New York Times. If you look up Tara Reade, you find articles that are not related to her whatsoever, no reference to Biden, absolutely nothing. But again, Blasey Ford, even if you spell it wrong because I did on accident, you still find all of these articles about it. The double standard here is evident to anyone who's willing to look at it. This accusation happened, I think, almost 2 weeks ago now, and yet it's nowhere to be seen. Not only that, but Joe Biden has done several interviews on CNN and MSNBC, and they haven't asked about it at all. They've completely ignored it, even though he's been there in person, and you think that would be an important thing to ask about. Especially since now Bernie Sanders has dropped out of the 2020 race, which means that essentially Joe Biden is the Democratic nominee for president, and yet they're still not vetting him completely, because there is this accusation of sexual assault made against him that they're completely ignoring and not looking into. I just want to highlight one last example of this horrible hypocrisy, and that is Alyssa Milano. I've never been a fan of Alyssa Milano. She's always being hyperbolic and putting forward this nonsense that is just not true. Take the Kavanaugh hearing, for instance. This is what she said. Every person who refuses to loudly and openly reject Brett Kavanaugh's nomination is telling every generation of Americans that an alleged abuser's career is more valuable than a survivor's humanity. So she is saying, kind of like I did earlier, that the mere fact that someone accused Brett Kavanaugh of sexual assault should have been enough to disqualify him from going to the Supreme Court. The mere fact that there was an accusation, even though it was not proven or disproven, that means that we need to take precedence over the survivor, and his career should apparently be ruined. But now, she's not saying the same thing. She waited quite a while to talk about this new accusation against Joe Biden, and that is because she is a pretty good friend of Joe Biden and has supported him for many years. This is now what she says. We have to sort of societally change that mindset to believing women. That does not mean at the expense of not giving men their due process. So now she has completely changed. She used to be, he's accused, let's go after him, but now it's he accused, let's wait and see what happens and see if there's any more evidence, which is the way it should be. Don't get me wrong. She has changed presumably for the better, but only because it's against a Democrat and no longer against a Republican. And this shows the rampant hypocrisy of Joe Biden, of the mainstream media, and of many of those on the left who are completely silent about this new accusation. Just to reiterate one more time, I have no idea what happened. I don't know what's true. I don't know what's false. I can have a belief, but that doesn't really impact the truth at all. Which is why, because I don't know, I'm withholding judgment. I'm trying to see if they do any more investigations to see what happens. I'm not going to say that he should be disqualified for running for president just because someone accused him of something, because that's ridiculous, which is something the Republicans recognized over a year ago. Democrats, however, did not recognize that and probably still won't. They continue to ignore this because the accusation is against someone they actually like. The new accusation of sexual assault against Joe Biden just shows how hypocritical he is, the mainstream media, and many of those on the left who are choosing to ignore this, even though they jumped on the opportunity to attack Brett Kavanaugh for a similar accusation. But what are your thoughts about this? let me know down below. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. I'd really appreciate it. And also leave a like or dislike, whatever you want to do. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.